Good evening. If you'd like, you can go ahead and open your Bibles up to John chapter 19. We'll start in John chapter 19. And we'll be jumping around a lot again because we're in a section here where it's very challenging to get all of the details exactly like we need it. And details are found in different places, so we have to move around. And even the order and exact chronology of it is not, I don't think, for certain. And so we may have some things in the wrong place, but we're doing the best that we can with that. So Jesus is on trial before Pilate, and Pilate's got a challenge on his hands. What's Pilate's dilemma? What? Jesus. That's right. Jesus is his dilemma. What's the problem? He knows he's innocent. This is an innocent man. And not only does he know that he's innocent, he's also got pressure on him because his wife has said, look, I suffered many things in a dream about this just man, have nothing to do with him. That's bizarre. And then Jesus, who's he claiming to be? Who's Jesus claiming to be? The Son of God and a king. And so Pilate is like, I really don't want to do anything with him. I want to let him go. But the Jews are adamant. And so Pilate tries a number of things. And so Pilate tries to release, pair Jesus, or I guess, Jesus with Barabbas, a notorious criminal. So then he has Jesus beaten and brought before the people, thinking surely they'll have pity and see. No, they still want to see him put to death. And so he continues to try different things. And we're getting near the end of that now because Pilate's starting to realize nothing is going to work. And you kind of see Pilate become very cynical here at the end. In other words, when he realizes that he's not going to be able to release Jesus without an uproar, and that would threaten his position as governor of the land to have an uproar while he's in charge. So you see him start to almost mock the Jews at this point. You see his attitude change against them. But let's pick up in verse 12. Now, in verse 11, he's called for a private audience with Jesus and question Jesus, and Jesus doesn't answer him. And he says, don't you understand that I have the power to either release you or have you crucified? And Jesus has a rather chilling statement. What is his statement? That's right. That's exactly right. The power is given to you by my Father. and you're going to use that power to have me crucified? I mean, that's, that would, if I was Pilate, that's what I would be hearing in that. So verse 12 says, from then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out and said, if you let this man go, what? They get Pilate right where they know it'll hurt him, because Pilate's answerable to Caesar. And so they make the accusation. They've already said he's a king. He's commanded that they don't pay tribute or taxes to Caesar, which was a lie. And now if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. So here's an accusation that we will bring towards Caesar if you let this man go. And that is that he promoted himself as a king, as a rival to Caesar, and you dismiss that. You let that go. Pilate realizes he's in trouble at this point. So let's read a little bit further here. Let's read down 13 through 15.
When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, behold your king. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar.
Wow. Okay, so a number of things to point out here. First of all, it was the preparation day of the Passover. Well, didn't Jesus eat the Passover the day before? The night before? So how's this the preparation for the Passover? That's exactly right. So you remember that the Passover is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts 7 days. And the first day and the last day, the first day being the Passover when the Passover lamb is eaten, the last day of it is also a holy day. And then, depending on how the calendar fell, there would be a Sabbath in there somewhere that would be kind of a special Sabbath because it fell during the week of this. And that's what's under consideration here, because we'll see that when they go to bury Jesus, they've got to hurry because it's the Sabbath. The sun is setting, and the sunset, Sabbath begins. So that's what's under consideration there. So he says, "Behold your king." I told you I felt like he was getting more sarcastic as this goes on because he's becoming more frustrated with the Jews. And I think this is one of those statements. He's kind of, here's Jesus in this condition. He's saying, yeah, here's your king. And what do they reply? Away with him. Do what to him? Crucify him. And you want me to crucify your king? And they say, we have no king but Caesar, which is, I think, under any other context, for them to say that would be blasphemous. And I mean, they would consider it blasphemous. And so it shows the height of their hypocrisy here to say something like this. Oh, no, our whole loyalty is towards Caesar. That's the only reason that we're putting this man forward, is because he's a threat to Caesar, and our loyalty is to Caesar, as if Pilate's is not. And that's what they're wanting to convey to Pilate is, you are no friend to Caesar. We are in this. Any thoughts, comments through verse 15?
So you think he's being sarcastic with people here?
I think so. When he says, you.
I just kind of wondered if he might have meant that literal, as in he couldn't find no fault in him, and he knew that Jesus was their king.
Well, I would say that's a possibility. I take it that he was being sarcastic just from what he's going to do. It seems like he's getting jabs at them, much like, he allowed his soldiers to dress Jesus up in a robe with a crown and mock him and beat him. And so it doesn't seem that he has true respect for Jesus as a king, but seems to be mocking the Jews as if that. But I don't know. Perhaps you're right. I have not considered that before, so I'd have to think more about that. Any other thoughts?
And you take it here that the Jews taking jabs at Pilate, right?
Yes.
And they said, we have no king but Caesar. It's like, well, we don't have a king but Caesar. And they said, you're not going to be Caesar's friend. Like questioning his, I think maybe they still question his loyalty to some degree.
Yes, I think that's right.
That's the big amount of leverage they would have at this point, kind of, isn't it, to be able to break going on with his head?
That's right. That's exactly right. That is the leverage that they have, and they know it's effective leverage too, because Caesar removes governors that don't keep peace in places or are not, ferociously loyal to Caesar. They're removed and disciplined quickly. So Pilate knows that, as a matter of fact, historically, and I don't have my facts straight here, so I'm going to say something and I couldn't back it up, and I'd have to go back and look at it. But either Pilate or the governor before Pilate, I think, was executed because their loyalty was in doubt or whatever. And so there was intense pressure felt by the governors in a number of regions, but particularly in Judea because it was a volatile state. You got to think about, within just a few years of this, you're going to have a major uprising in this area. Rome already knows this is a difficult area to control. And so they want somebody in there that doesn't put up with anything, and so the Jews know they've got leverage here.
Seems like his political ambitions is outweighing his conscience.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Caesar's the Roman king. They started out with his blasphemy.
Yes, that's right. The truth is changing here as far as the charges are changing depending on what will stick. And so Very good. All right, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 27. Matthew 27. And let's read 24 through 26.
When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. And all the people answered and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then he released Barabbas to them. And when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
All right. I'm sorry, I told you to read verse 26, but that summarizes a lot of things there in verse 26. We haven't covered all of them yet. Some of it we have. So Pilate, when he realizes, okay, I'm not going to convince these people otherwise. And all that's going to happen here is this is going to become an unruly mob, and I'm going to have to answer for that. So what's his solution here? He does not want to put Jesus to death because he believes Jesus is innocent. You said his politics are overcoming his conscience, and I think that's exactly right. Here's an attempt to justify or harmonize his conflicts of interest here. So what does he do? Yes. All right. So let me ask you, does that work? When you're in a position, you have the authority to do right or to do wrong, but there's pressure put on you. Is it okay to say, well, I think we should do this, but whatever? And that's really what he's doing. And so he's making a public statement. I think he's innocent. But if y'all are persistent on doing this, okay, I'll do it. And so we commonly use that expression today. Well, I wash my hands of it. And what that's supposed to mean is I have nothing more to do with what I think is wrong here. But that's not what Pilate does. Pilate says he washes his hands of it, and then he goes and gives the order for him to be crucified. And so that's not the same. That's not the same. So here's this public show in an attempt to kind of ease his conscience or make a statement that he's doing what's right when actually he doesn't. But what is more interesting about this statement here is, what do the people answer? Yes. In other words, we are willing to accept full responsibility for his death. His blood be upon us and our children. And that's exactly what they would get, is full responsibility for his death. And so when Jerusalem is destroyed, and by the way, remember Jesus as he tops the Mount of Olives coming into Jerusalem on that last week, and he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem." He wept over it. This is what he was seeing. He knew where this was going. He knew what they would do. All the righteous blood that had been spilt throughout the decades by them rejecting God's prophets would culminate in them rejecting Jesus and his blood being upon them and their children. And so judgment would come. Judgment would come.
Ask a question about that.
Yes.
That phrase there. Do you think there's anything to? So I did not look this up, so it's probably not good. Not make this comment, but in the old law, whenever they were kind of initiating the covenant and they were making sacrifices, they
Right.
sprinkled the blood out on the people.
Yes.
Do you think that is meant to be similar to what they're saying here in some kind of way?
The way that I'm understanding it, the only way that would make sense to me if they meant it that way is kind of like when Caiaphas, the high priest, said it's right. Yes. Yeah. That it was expedient for one man to die for the nation. And him being the high priest that year spoke by inspiration and saying that. So he didn't mean it as this is going to save our nation from sin. He meant it as this will save our nation from Roman occupation or punishment. So perhaps this is prophetic in that way as well. But it seems, I don't know. I mean, what's going to come upon the Jews and their children as a whole is going to be judgment. There will be those that come out and are cleansed by his blood. We'll see, in Acts 2 and other places.
That was true.
That's right. Yes.
I just didn't know if it was maybe in some way a parallel, or not parallel, but a double meaning.
Yeah. And it could be. It could be. Since we have an example of that in Caiaphas' statement, maybe that's the case. Yeah. 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 Matthew, more than any other, is very clear of their, he's adamant. The Romans wanted to release him. The Jews are the one that called for him to be killed. And he's the one who makes this statement here. And the interesting thing about that to me is Matthew, out of the four Gospels, seems to be written to a Jewish audience. And so he's writing to Jews, a Jewish audience, saying, you are responsible. And by the way, day of Pentecost, when Peter and the other apostles stand up and begin to preach, who do they put the blame on? You crucified him. And the statement over and over is on that. So I think the desire to say that they were not, it was the Romans rather than the Jews. With a lot of modern evangelicals, there is the belief that the Jews are still and always will be God's chosen people. And therefore, the Jews are always the good guys. The Jews are always the good guys. And even when they're a little bit bad, that was still, it worked out to God's plan. And they will forever be God's chosen people. And so they were not ultimately the ones that were responsible for that, even though they kind of say it. But that's just not the picture that the Bible paints. And so, now, I do believe that there has been a lot of heinous crimes against Jews based upon the idea, or at least used as an excuse. What was the movie we watched? Fiddler on the Roof? Or what was the movie that we watched recently where they said, you Christ killer, or whatever? They were referring to a Jew in the 20th or 19th century and saying, you're a Christ killer. Well, that Jew didn't have anything to do with that. But so there, in attempts to persecute Jews throughout the years, there have been accusations that, you're a Christ killer. You were responsible for the death of Christ, and therefore that justifies modern persecution against them or whatever. And I don't believe that at all. But the Bible does place the blame that they were the ones that rejected Jesus and killed him. Yeah. I do think it's prophetic that it goes forward that they would be rejected as God's people. I don't know, if it's predicting the Holocaust or not. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, let's go back over to Luke. Luke 23. Luke 23 in verse 26. We'll start, and let's go through 31, 26 through 31.
Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and the breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?
So as they lead Jesus away, bearing his cross. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations about the cross. My understanding is the Greek word there just means a timber. And so from what we know historically, sometimes a cross was an X. Sometimes a cross was what we typically think of a cross, sometimes a T, sometimes it was just a single pole and their hands would be nailed above their head. And so we don't know what the cross looked like on that. But he's dragging this timber that he's going to be crucified on, and he needs assistance. Well, why would he need assistance? Yeah. The fact that he can walk at all is pretty amazing. And so they finally compel somebody, Simon, the Cyrenian, to come and to help with this. And so he's dragging the cross after Jesus as Jesus is going. And there's just a multitude of people. And who were the people that were specified here? Women. What were they doing? Lamenting and mourning. So we get the picture. Up to this point, we've gotten the picture of fearful apostles, and then very antagonistic Jews. We haven't seen anybody that's really very sympathetic towards Jesus at this point. And here the women are, and they're there weeping and mourning, following after. Where are the apostles at this point? Are they in this multitude? We will see some later on at the cross, but it seems like at the only ones that are coming forward at this point to say that they feel any compassion for Jesus or sympathy for Jesus are these women. And so they're coming along and weeping and mourning this. And in this, Jesus turns and he says something. And first of all, I think it's amazing that in this condition, what's his mind on? What's he concerned about? Yeah, he's thinking about them and what's going to happen to the nation because of what we just talked about. Them saying, let his blood be upon us and our children. And Jesus said, yeah, that's going to happen. And so he says, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming which they will say, blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. In other words, those that don't have children to lose, because they won't feel the grief of that. And then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and the hills cover us. They'll be looking for a place to hide because of the great outpouring of wrath that will come upon them. And what God's going to do is he's going to use the Romans to come in and to desolate the country. And the Jews literally would run to the hills and the mountains and try to hide in caves and so forth. And many of them would die there. And so Jesus is saying this very predictive statement at this point, but it's fascinating to me that even at this moment, Jesus' thoughts are on others and thinking of them in this. And that expression where he says, if they do these things in a green wood, what will they do in the dry? You may have a better thought on this. I think he's looking and he's saying, if this is what these people will do while they're God's people, what will they do when they're not? In other words, if right now, when they're still under a covenant with Jehovah, what's going to happen to them later? And I do know that from Josephus's records that before the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jews were acting in some of the most inhumane and barbaric ways that you can imagine. They were not acting like God's people in any way. So maybe that's what he has in consideration there. Any thoughts on that?
In Acts, just a little while later, they're forbidding the apostles to teach in Jesus' name.
Yeah, that's right.
That's just how bad and wicked they have become. This is the peak of their wickedness.
Very good. Okay, let's go ahead and take 32 through 34. We'll just break it up into a few verses at a time here.
There were also two others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots.
Okay, in Mark's account here, they talk about they led him to be crucified, and before they crucified him, they offered him wine mixed with gall. And my understanding is this was kind of the one act of kindness or compassion that they would give to those that they were executing. And my understanding was it was kind of a nasty concoction that was given to dull the senses, somewhat as a painkiller or just to stupefy them a little bit during this process. And what does Jesus do? He refuses it. Why do you think Jesus would refuse this? He wanted to be in his right mind. Why would he need to be very sober-minded right now? Resist temptation. I think that he's come to the moment that he knows. We already know how he feels about this. He does not want to do this. He's pleaded with the Father, if there's another way, let it be. But he's accepted that this is what he's going to have to do. He certainly doesn't need anything that's going to lower his ability to think clearly about how he needs to approach this. And so that makes sense to me, that the reason that he rejects this is, no, I can't have anything that is distorting my thinking at this moment. I've got to be able to deal with this in the right way. And so he does not take it on that. The crucifixion process, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with that. The idea was that you stretch out a person's arms either over their head or out to the side and fasten them to this, and then you lift them up and let them hang there. And it's a very, very slow way to die, because what you eventually die of is you smother, because you're with your arms outstretched like that, hanging puts enough strain on the diaphragm that eventually you can't breathe in that position unless you lift yourself up. And they've got, your legs are eventually going to get tired where you can't lift yourself up anymore, and so you eventually die of suffocation. By the way, you remember when they wanted to speed up the deaths, what did they do? They break their legs so that they couldn't pick themselves up anymore. In that, they didn't just kill them, slice the throat or something like that. No, they still let it be slowly, but they broke their legs. Nothing about this was a quick and painless. Everything was designed to drag it out and make it as painful as possible. And so the Bible just quickly says they crucified him, doesn't give us all the details, but no first century reader that was familiar with the process needed any details, because if you'd ever seen it, you would never forget it, and so that is what they're doing here. In this moment, while this is happening, it's recorded at different times in different accounts. But Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And so, I'm sorry, we got off track here a little bit. I missed my reference point over. I know where we're supposed to be. Turn over to John 19. Sorry. Went a little bit too far there and forgot a few details. Let's go over to John 19 in verse 19.
Before we go any further, do you think there's any chance that Jesus also had the wisdom to realize if he took that doll or whatnot, it had the potential of cheapening, the sacrifice that was taking place for
Maybe.
generations forevermore?
Yes.
He wasn't willing to risk
Right.
that anyway.
It's possible. It's possible. It does seem that he doesn't want to take any shortcuts on this in that. So I could see that being the case. Yeah. All right. John 19, verse 19 through 21. Let's do 19 through 21.
Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Therefore the chief priest of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews," but he said, "I am the King." But he said, "I am the King of the Jews."
Yeah, so I have taken this to be another jab by Pilate at them on this. But the point that Colby made, maybe that's a possibility, that Pilate wants to try to honor him in that rather than just taking a jab at the Jews. But either way, the Jews are going to protest this. And by the way, how did Pilate have it written? What languages? Where everybody could read it. Made sure it was in Hebrew too. there so that they could read it. And so as they pass by, they see the sign that says, Jesus, King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And they immediately protest and say, no, 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 don't put that. Say that he said that was the case. In other words, we're not saying that. We don't think he was. You make sure that that was a self, that he's the one who made that. And what's Pilate's response? No, it's done. It's done. Pilate's through placating them. I think he's filled up with, had his fill of them, and he's not playing any more games with them. He's like, nope, you got what you wanted. He's being crucified. I didn't think you needed to be, but you did it. I'm not making any other allowances for you on this. And so it is interesting that the title of who he really was stated there for them all to see. Now, in verse 23, let's read 23 through 24.
Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one place. They said, therefore, among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things.
I think this gives us some insight into some things that it would be difficult for us to understand. First of all, how many of you would want some criminal's bloody clothing? I don't think any of us we wouldn't want that at all. It's like, well, burn it or something. I don't want it. But they wanted it. So first of all, the Romans, the way that they were paid was by the spoil of battle, that they would get to keep whatever, they pillaged if they raided somewhere or overtook something. And in this case, those that were executing got to keep the articles that were on the criminals that they were executing. And second thing that I want to point out is that clothing in ancient times was so valuable that most people wouldn't have more than a couple of changes of clothes. And poor people would only have one change of clothes, and maybe not much of that. And so the Roman soldiers realized that every article of clothing that Jesus has is valuable to some degree, and so we'll divide it up among ourselves. So much so that the fabric itself, they were taking the garments and dividing them into sections. And so can you imagine taking a pair of blue jeans and saying, all right, well, here, we'll follow this seam down, and you can have the back half, I'll take the front half. We can't even fathom that fabric would be that valuable in that. But his tunic is woven all in one piece, so there's not a seam that they can divide it without the whole thing coming unraveled. So they make a game of chance out of it and say, well, we'll cast lots and see who gets it. But as they're doing that, they're fulfilling a prophecy. Anybody know where that prophecy is found? Psalm 22. Psalm 22. And so as we go through this, I want you to see the picture of what's taking place here and how these things are being fulfilled. So at Jesus' feet, they are literally casting lots for his garments, dividing up his clothing and casting lots for his garments. And then around him are his enemies that are mocking him. And I want us to go back to that. So let's look over. Does anybody have anything else they want to say about dividing up the garments or anything? Yes. I don't think so. I think that was taken off of him and his clothes were given back to him. I don't know if we covered that or not, but I believe we may not. I know we're skipping some stuff here, and so I think that was given back. So yeah, that garment I think was just put on him temporarily to make him dress him up like a king and then take it away from him. But I don't think that's what's still on him at this point.
It's almost like this has turned in, built up, and until it's turned into such a big deal to them that maybe winning one of these articles of clothing it would be kind of like having a souvenir to them.
Maybe.
To them.
Yeah, maybe. All right, let's go back over to Matthew now, Matthew 27. And I want to pick up Hmm. Well, hold on. Let me get my bearings here.
There probably wouldn't typically be much of a follow-up to the crucifixion side. You know, if you're criminals, how much of a following would you have? Probably, you know, something like that. So that would probably stand out
Yeah.
at this point.
Right, that there's a big crowd here witnessing this. Yeah, this guy, he's really something that everybody turned out for his execution. Yep. Okay, I'm going to try to piece some of these things together. Let's just go over to Matthew account here, and we'll cover this. And I know I'm getting some of it out of order here. I want to look at verse 39, Matthew 27, starting in 39. And let's go down to verse 43.
And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads, and saying, You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him come now down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God.
All right, and in Luke's account, it mentions that the soldiers are mocking him as well. So you got everybody here mocking him. And by the way, if you look in 44, even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him, saying the same things. So Jesus has got the leaders of his own people mocking him, the soldiers of the Romans, who were the Jews' enemies, mocking him, and then criminals that are in the same state that he's in, mocking him as well. Everybody is just piling on Jesus here with laughing at his situation. We'll come back to the robbers in a little bit, but holding your place there, turn over to Psalm 22. We mentioned Psalm 22 earlier, but I want you to notice how similar this is. First of all, we have several things here that is very recognizable to us. Psalm 22. And Dwight, if you don't mind reading 16 through 18.
For dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord,
Yeah, through 18 there. All right. And then look at verse 6 through 8. Let's read 6 through 8.
But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, He trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him.
Okay. Now, David had written this how many years before? About 1,000 years before? Yeah, about 1,000 years before David had written this. David wrote this about his own situation, saying, here's how he feels. Everybody around me is laughing at me and mocking me. The dogs have surrounded me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and feet. Now, they didn't literally pierce David's hands and feet, but he said, that's what it feels like. I can count on they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. In other words, it's just like they want to strip everything away from me and divide it up among themselves. Nobody's on my side. So David's writing about his situation, and this psalm starts off with this statement, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? In other words, look at all these terrible things that are happening to me, and you're not rescuing me. Now, David comes back in the latter part of the psalm saying, you really are with me. It appears as if you have forsaken me, but you really haven't. Okay. But you see the specificity of the things that David said there? My hands and my feet have been pierced. casting lot for my garment. They laugh at me. They say, he trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him. Since almost word for word what's said. One of the statements that Jesus makes on the cross is, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Quoting verse 1, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, they misunderstand him and say he's calling for Elijah. We'll get to this in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and cover it now. But he wasn't calling for Elijah. And he wasn't saying, God, I don't understand why you've forsaken me. What he's saying is, do you not understand that you are precisely fulfilling what David said in Psalm 22? If you were familiar with Psalm 22 at all, you could not mistake the fact that these things are literally happening to Jesus. What David spoke of figuratively, I think, were literally happening to Jesus. And so I believe that he quoted that first verse, just like we would quote a verse of a song to bring about the whole idea of the song. He's quoting the first verse of this psalm to bring about the whole idea of saying, do you not see that you are fulfilling this? And they don't see it because they, he's calling for Elijah. And they miss it. But it was recorded for us to see, in case we missed it, it is being fulfilled exactly. So 1,000 years before, God said specifically what would happen through David. Any other thoughts about that?
Well, have you thought of the similarity here when they're mocking him, going back to when he was being tempted by Satan, and Satan was, I can't quote it, I can't go back and quote it word for word, when he was, throw yourself down.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, if you're the Son of God.
I can save you.
Right. Yeah.
It seems to me that
Same.
this is very similar to what went on there.
You're right. Yeah, that's that same thing. Prove it. And all of this the Holy Spirit sent him out there to fast, turn these stones into bread. If you're the Son of God, so here's this effort. Sin again. If you're the Son of God, then do what is against your Father's will. Oh, that was the sentiment in all of those temptations, and that's the sentiment here as well. Very good. All right. Anything else there? All right. Let's go back over to Matthew now. So I think we let off. Something else that we have missed here. We read it earlier. What does Jesus pray at this moment? We read it earlier, and he may have actually prayed this before. He said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Whew. Well, the temptation would be to wipe them out. And yet, while they are mocking, while they're dividing his garment, while everyone around him is chiding him and mocking him, he looks up to his Father and says, forgive them. They don't get what they're doing. They don't realize it. And that is astounding. Again, in this, who's he thinking of? Himself? Not himself. He's thinking of others. And let me ask you this, because I think this is important as well. Should that be our prayer for our enemies? Stephen's going to pray that, I think, when they're stoning him. Similar type thing. Yes, sir.
In that, and what you're talking about in Stephen and in Jesus, it seems like that invoked more rage against him.
Yeah, that's right.
He did that.
Yeah.
It's almost like that lit, it was bomb, well, fuse, it lit a bomb.
Right. Yeah.
Even in Stephen's account, it was the same way.
You're right. Very good.
You think in 42 when they said to come down from the cross, we believe me, is that just another making fun because this man had already walked on water, raised the dead, fed thousands of people with just a fish? I mean, is this just another way of saying, yeah, we believe?
Yeah. Yeah. So their level of faith, they had seen signs done and they asked, well, give us another sign if you're the Christ. They'd said that earlier. And I think that's the same thing here. I don't think this is a sincere, we'd really like to know. this is, yeah, I think that's accurate point there, that they've had plenty of evidence. They're not interested. It's just a example to mock them, because obviously God is not helping him here, right? Everybody could see God is not helping him, and so it's easy to pile on then and say, yeah, sure, you're God's son. He's not doing much for you right now, is he? And so I think that's the picture of what's happening here. All right, we're going to have to stop there. Remind me that where we have stopped is we've got the criminals in verse 44 of Matthew 27. The robbers who were with him reviled him with the same thing. So they're mocking him with the same thing. We want to come back to them when we come back. Thank you for your good attention. I'm sorry that I'm jumping or fumbling around with some of the connections here, but I told Dwight I've looked over this about 4 times today, and I knew that I was going to struggle to get all of those in the right order.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact